All right. Mic check, mic check. Can anyone hear us that's online? If you type in the chat, welcome to US-Cuba Normalization Conference Labor Panel. You type in the chat if you can hear us. Randy, I can see you. Perfect. All right, we'll go ahead and assume they can hear us. Zoom space. I will try and check that online, but okay, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Welcome. Woo! Floor is yours. We're live. Amazing. Have a great workshop.
Thank you, Allison.
Yeah.
Hello. Hello. A mic. Oh, can they not hear us without the microphone? Is that what you're saying? No, because we're on. I mean, she just checked the sound and they said online that they can hear us. So I think we're good. Thank you. Hi everyone. I think I'm just gonna stay seating. It feels like a seating kind of moment instead of having to do like this. This doesn't make sense. Okay, so thank you all for being here. My name is Justine. This is my lovely co-moderator. And just so you know, a rundown of what's going to happen, we're going to do brief, like very quick introductions where we just say like 2 seconds who we are, because we can get more into that in the panel. And we have some statements to read from comrades who couldn't be here, and then we'll just dive into the session and questions and fun with the room. So thank you very much. Yes, I'm Dean Medina. I'm an organizer with the Young Communist League and the Cuba Tea Coalition, and I'm also a worker at Amazon and involved for unions. And I'm not the only ALU, there's a lot of solid ALU folks in the room, so sort of clap for them as well. And you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Fordham. I'm a law student here at Fordham, and I'm aspiring to do labor law in the 3rd year. So on my way out, I don't have as much exciting things to say.
Go down the line.
My name is Tristan Martinez. I am one of the lead organizers for the Amazon Labor Union.
My name is Cooper Caraway. I'm the Executive Director of the Service Employees International Union, Connecticut State Council, proudly representing 60,000 union members across the state.
Yeah.
I'm Fritz Edler. I'm a special representative for Railroad Workers United, which is a inter-union alliance of cross-craft railroad workers in North America, and a veteran railroader for 40 years. Washington, D.C.
My name's Judy Sheridan Gonzalez. I'm been an emergency room nurse for many years. Immediate past president of the New York State Nurse Association, representing 42,000 nurses in New York, and just led a massive, amazing strike in January. Yes. Thank you so much. So we do have a couple of statements. First, I would like to welcome Judy. I don't know if you want to stand or if you want to sit. It's up to you, however you're most comfortable. But yeah, do you want to just take my seat here? Or do you want to stand at the
I'll
podium?
stand over here just not to disrupt you. All right,
Sure.
okay. So my name is Julie Walensky. I'm with US-Cuba Labor Solidarity. And just to give you an idea where this group came about, it's a group of activists, union activists who are involved in Cuba Solidarity, decided to outreach to a labor notes conference that took place in Chicago last year. So there was 4,000 unions there. It was a really good conference. A lot of Amazon workers. There was a lot of organizing at Starbucks, railroad workers were there, Delta, and so forth. But I mean, it was very inspirational because what you saw was a new generation coming forward and a lot of people who were kind of like trying to put the movement back. So we did outreach, introduced Cuba and Cuba trade unions to the conference, and just kind of raised the idea of solidarity with workers. And so now there is a group out in LA is also doing a table, a labor note conference in LA, and also doing a reception to do the discussion about labor solidarity with Cuba. So we probably, I would encourage everybody to get involved. We have a table. We are very likely to do a table at the next labor notes conference coming up next year. And hopefully some of you guys can help join in ongoing discussion and outreach and at labor notes. So just in terms of, we initially wanted to get a recorded message, but we're going to Plan B, which is basically a statement of solidarity from the CTC. And I just want to say a little brief word about the Cuban Federation of Trade Unionists. It's a little bit different. I don't know how many people have been to Cuba, but the Federation of Trade Unionists in Cuba, not only do they kind of, well, they're represented both on a municipal level, state level, and also on a national level. They have over 80,000 place sites where the unions are involved, and they're involved not only in workers' rights, but they're also involved in managing production and trying to figure out how to do production productivity to help develop their. And when I was there a couple of years ago, we toured a factory and got a sense of the impact of the embargo in terms of their production goals. They want to keep parts, their assembly and stuff. So so let's just kind of like a little bit about the TC, and I think it's really kind of like, you know, if there's an opportunity, and there are multiple labor trade union delegations that will be going to Cuba around May Day. One that's being organized out of Sacramento, Brotherhood, building relations with Cuban labor, Sacramento. And also then there's a smaller, like a 5-day labor delegation that's being hosted by the CTC that we have more information about at our table. So having said that, let me just kind of read this letter or this statement of solidarity from the CTC. Dear comrades and friends, the current times are intense and complex, defiant for all of us who inhabit this planet. The Central de Trabajadores de Cuba and the trade unions reaffirm our commitment to the defense and mobilization of the workers of the world in their struggle for peace and the just causes of people. The Cuban Revolution throughout its history has suffered the attacks of the greatest power that humanity has ever known. The United States, in its incessant desire to destroy the example that Cuba means, has rehearsed all kinds of dirty war against the government. Blind to frustration, the empire and its employees resort to old attack practices with modern techniques of unconventional warfare. Their purpose is to create a climate of citizen insecurity that leads to a social explosion. From this scenario, we reaffirm that Cuba, with creative resistance, is honored to cultivate peace, relations of friendship, and cooperation with trade union organizations, solidarity movements under the indispensable principle that unity will build solidarity, independent and democratic nations. The CTC denounces the interventionist maneuvers of the United States government and reaffirms our unrestricted support against work of the revolution and do not forget the signs of solidarity with the process of which the workers together with what has been. Once again, we call on all friendly organizations and the decisive workday and victory continue updating our economic. So victory always.
Thank you so much. So thank you, Julie. I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to speak loudly because I think perhaps that the microphone's over here, the only way that the Zoom is getting the audio. So let's just all use our theater kid voices and project. So I am going to read a statement from Chris Smalls, president of the Amazon Labor Union. I'm sure some of you saw on the program, scheduled to be here. Unfortunately, he could not because he's in Canada doing some important solidarity support for Amazonians that are working up there. So I'm going to read his statement and then we will turn to our comrades on the panel. Dear sisters and brothers, friends and fellow fighters of the US-Cuba Normalization Conference. I'm sorry that other commitments keep me from joining you today, as I am in Canada helping Amazon workers organize a union. Please accept this message from our leadership team at the Amazon Labor Union, wishing you well in your deliberations and success in your actions to end the US blockade of Cuba and remove Cuba from Washington's list of so-called terrorist nations. The work you are doing shows the world that the links between our government's domestic and forest policy. The 60-year-long blockade of Cuba, sanctions that Washington keeps piling on, pray its hostility, any enduring conquests by working people here and abroad. Labor law in the United States is stacked against working people. As we have seen with the National Labor Relations Board stalling on recognizing the ALU at JFK for 9 months, neither Democrats nor Republicans represent workers' interests. Another example is the national contract imposed on our brothers and sisters in the rail unions last year. The entirely predictable disaster we saw February 3rd in East Palestine, Ohio, is the result of the constant erosion of safety systems. The big rail companies have ignored the sensible warnings of all rail workers over the years in the constant pursuit of super profit. But I tell you this, rail workers move the trains and do their best to keep us all safe, and I trust them more than anyone else. Likewise, the working conditions in Amazon's warehouses are deplorable. There have been many walkouts by workers from California to New York. Washington's claim that it can apply its laws and military might anywhere around the world is the other side of the same coin. The economic persecution against Cuba is illegal, has been condemned by almost all countries of the world at the UN. It is a clear attempt to reverse the gains of the working people of Cuba who took power in 1959 and have been an example to working people the world over. All the lies about Cuba come down to this. Big business and their governments hate the example of a small country where working people can actually decide their future. We in the ALU have learned how even after winning a representation election fair and square, powerful companies like Amazon can drag out the fight for months or years, refusing to sit down to negotiate a contract and hoping to weaken and ultimately defeat the union. They fire workers and union organizers. Legal action to get these workers their jobs back have not resulted in a single reinstatement. We now know that the NLRB is part of the problem. They ultimately will not defend our interests. This is why we have to keep fighting. We have to build a team of committed rank and file organizers to win the trust of our fellow workers. We have to win the solidarity of other unions all over the US. We have to begin to function like a union and defend each and every Amazon employee. And finally, we have to build a democratic union that answers to the rank and file. ALU stands with you. We should all oppose the cruel and undemocratic blockade and all the additional sanctions Washington has imposed on Cuba illegally. Stand with our Cuban brothers and sisters. We support your fight against the cruel and inhuman blockade that has been imposed on Cuba by all the US presidents for decades. For this reason, we have a strong delegation of 10 ALU members and 3 members of cause who are organizing Amazon in Raleigh, North Carolina, going to Cuba with the Los Angeles Labor and Activist Delegation, invited by the Cuban Trade Union Federation, the International Committee of Friendship with the People. We look forward to learning from and sharing our experiences with Cuban workers at the docks and ports, at the fuel depot in Matanzas, warehouses and factories with youth of the Federation of University Students, Federation of Cuban Women, and others. We will return with renewed strength to join with you to build solidarity with other labor unions in ending the blockade. To quote Maurice Bishop, who led the Grenadian Revolution until his assassination, "Forward ever." Signed, Chris Smalls, President of the AA. Well, so now that we've heard from guests who could not be here, we're gonna dive right into comrades. And we're gonna do some questions. If everyone could just watch the time to trick, we're only gonna go to 4, 'cause we're a little late, so I have to go a few minutes. If you don't, I will harass you. Like, I'll throw cars across the way. But yeah, we're just gonna kind of get started.
So our first question is abroad. How did each of you get involved in the Cuba Solidarity movement? Brought you to it?
Actually, Justine is the one that got me involved in the Cuba Solidarity Movement. You know, she invited me to, I believe, the UN building to see the vote. And after learning more about the experiences of the Cuban people, and as a child of an immigrant myself, and my father is also Puerto Rican, so, you know, to see fellow Hispanics and Latinos go through such struggle because of our government, I could not believe it's something like that would happen in the 21st century. So I thank Justine for opening my eyes to the struggle of the Cuban people, and looking forward to do whatever I can to help any way possible.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you to the moderators. Thank you to the organizers of this conference, all the workers who have been busting their ass to get all of this together. Don't need to forget about them. Considering the week we're in and the month we're in, I would be remiss if I didn't recognize my beautiful daughter Luna here, and my beautiful and the heroic women of Cuba, without which the revolution and their resistance and fortitude throughout imperialist aggression would not be possible. The best way I can explain how I came to solidarity with the Cuban people can best be described in a story about Nelson Mandela. When Nelson Mandela was freed from prison by the people of South Africa, he visited the United States, and he faced quite a bit of criticism because of his friendship with Comandante Fidel Castro. And his response was, the mistake that people in the United States make is thinking that their enemies must be our enemies, that the enemies of the United States must be the enemies of South Africa. That exact same principle and logic and perspective can be applied to the working class in the United States. The working class in the United States is led to believe that the enemies of the capitalists, the enemies of our bosses, must necessarily be our enemies. When Fidel Castro, Hugo Chavez, the socialist and revolutionary leaders around this world have shown much more solidarity to working people, to people like my family and your family in the United States than any capitalist in this country ever has. And that's how I came to solidarity.
I actually a fan of the Cuban Revolution, like a lot of people my age did more than 50 years ago, and including admiration for some of the revolutionaries like Che and Fidel. And besides, it was one of the principal reasons that I decided to do work within the labor movement, for general reasons, but also because of the Cuban connection. And maybe later we'll have a talk about I was a participant as a guest of the Cuban Trade Union Federation for railroad labor organizers back in 2016, and it's pertinent to what the current big narrative about railroad safety and things like that.
I guess I was from a similar generation, and I think the Cuban Revolution gave a lot of us hope. There were a lot of revolutions going on around the world. I was young, I was a student, but was really mesmerized by the progress that was being made and the changes that were going on. It was a very hopeful time for young people, and made a lot of progress. I had gone to Cuba in 1980 with a group of health workers called La Brigada Antonio Maceo. And it was really interesting because the government then, the country, the economy was supported more by the Soviet Union. And you could see what could happen in a socialist nation that had resources and access to capital. I use the word capital. But was able to develop industry, was able to make some developments. And of course, we were very interested in the way that they constructed at that time, the healthcare system. And going there when people had been through pre-revolutionary, post-revolutionary society was really different than in my subsequent visits. People had a memory, a real visual and verbal and physical memory of what happened prior to the revolution and what the progress was for families and children post-revolution. Having gone since then, Union, we sent many delegations because we wanted to study the healthcare system, compare it to our healthcare system, and see how a country with very few resources could provide far better care than we provide here. I saw the difference in terms of what the blockade has done to the suffering of people and half-built buildings and all the things that were happening because of the lack of resources. And still, standing in there dealing with disasters far better than we do, having real care, real primary care, absolute primary care, and opening up people's minds to what a different kind of a healthcare system looked like. So it was really a wonderful educational experience for a lot of our members, because we, of course, were fighting for a better healthcare system here, a national healthcare system, or a New York State, a state healthcare system, which we still are fighting for, which has been demonized as socialized medicine, right? This terrorist word of socialism that people attach to anything that's going to make life better for them. So I think that the trips were critical because it allowed people to not only interact with them, but also with other people, and hear what life was like and have those relationships. And we still have trips that go and healthcare and different schools and other things there. So it's been a wonderful experience for people who never were exposed to beginnings of the revolution and seeing what's going on now, but conditions are really different. And that's why we do it.
So this is a question for anyone, multiple of you can answer it. But what do you think that American workers can learn from the Cuban revolutionary experience, either historically or today from the workers of Cuba?
One thing I would, commend the Cuban people for is that even though the lack of resources that they have available to them, I think the one thing that we can learn from them is not only that, we can do anything we put our mind to if we really try, especially, with the weight on your shoulder that no one's going to come and help, and I think that mentality of the Cuban people is that, no one's going to come and help us. We got to do it ourselves. I think that's the mentality that is lost on most Americans, at least nowadays, is that everybody expects some kind of assistance. But the Cuban people have not gotten any in the past, I'm guessing, like 50 years or so. So for them to be able to just roll up their sleeves and get it done themselves, and even better than we can, I think that's something that should be valued and something that should be taught to modern society.
Yeah, so the Cuban people have what we want. They have what we want. The Cuban people have, there's a lot of resources they're lacking. The embargo is really strangling their economy. But as far as the daily life of a Cuban person and a Cuban family, they have a sense of freedom that working people in the United States can't even comprehend. Because they have control over their own destinies. They have control over their own lives, their own economies, their own political system. When working class people, we don't even have control over what time we go into work. We hardly have any real control over what we have for dinner. And so they have what we want. And so they've created for us a blueprint. which is the Cuban Revolution did not start in the Sierra Maestra. The Cuban Revolution started long before that. People forget that Fidel Castro was a lawyer who ran for Congress before heading into the mountains, before he was thrown in jail. They have shown a blueprint. They achieved independence with Jose Marti, and then they attempted every possible way to gain power for working class people. When one method failed, they adapted and adjusted and tried another method. And when that failed, they adapted. They kept what was successful and they abandoned what didn't work, and they adapted new methods and tried again and tried again and tried again. And then on New Year's Eve, Batista and all his capitalist goons loaded up all the blankets and pillows and shampoos and soaps from the hotels, and they left Cuba and left it to the workers, to the working class people to control that island. And that's what we have to do. While working class people have been struggling for democracy in this country since 1776, we have struggled for some kind of democratic control, some kind of worker ownership, some kind of something. People like you have existed in the United States since it was created. And we have tried all kinds of different ways to get control over our country and over our land and over our government. And we have to learn from the Cubans that we have to abandon what doesn't work, keep what does work, and adjust and adjust and adjust until Donald Trump and all his capitalist buddies and all of Wall Street eventually on some New Year's Eve someday soon packs up all the shampoos and soaps from the hotel room and leaves to some European safe haven.
Yeah.
Let's start.
In the interest of time, I need a great many stories. Real specific about an example that is specific to the railroad and that people will all understand because they've been paying attention to the news. So 10 years ago, on July 6th, in the small rural town in Canada, in French Canada of Lac-Mégantic, a runaway train vaporized 47 people instantly. Town burned for a week. They still not recovered. They will never recover. That's not one of the things that's possible. In the aftermath of that, they scapegoated a couple of the last guys in the chain of bad decisions, dangerous decisions, and tried to put them in prison for the rest of their lives. And one of my jobs was to head up the international defense for those guys. Put that story aside for the moment, bring it up to the moment where everybody knows about what's happened in East Palestine. East Palestine is a town of about the same size as Lac-Mégantic. Now, as I said earlier, and they are going to have the same heritage of toxic forever chemicals that the situation in Atlantic, which we can measure today, 10 years later. Going forward to 2016, I was invited to participate with other rail activists in a delegation to Cuba to meet with our counterparts in Cuba. And we went around and we visited all their training facilities and all the different things related to that. We were able to see the way that one thing that was quite important for us, or at least it was for me, was when we were meeting with their leaders, we said to them, okay, well, there's this incident that took place. This, everybody knows about what happened in Lac-Mégantic. How would you have done that? What would be the policies of the Cuban trade unionists with regard to a similar thing? And essentially, one of the things, the short version of what they said is that when they knew that they needed to transport really violent, desperately bad, dangerous chemicals and things like that, every town along the route would be notified. They would do it at night when people would be, home and not around where the tracks were and stuff. They would bring out all of the emergency services and they would all be all along the route, prepared and trained for every possible situation. In the Mégantic situation, even though the American-based short line that had set that situation up, even though they knew that they were making a overlong, over heavy train of one of the most dangerous, explosive things. They didn't think it was important to have any kind of a fire plan. No fire plan at all. Nobody in the communities got any kind of heads up or training or anything. Cuban showed how the workers' government, a government of workers, they would be able to, make sure that policies were there. And most of the folks here also know that in this country, we just had a great controversy last fall with railroad workers who were ready to strike across the country because it was their employers basically would force them to go to work, whether, in any number of ways in which they wouldn't be 100%, because they're sick, because they're exhausted, or maybe even simply just because they are distracted by this or that problem that they really, really shouldn't be on a train, operating a train. This is not the situation that they would have had in Cuba. And I would, just in the interest of time, again, this is a much bigger discussion and worthy of friends, is that my organization, Railroad Workers United, after the recent incidents and things, have initiated a call, and a number of unions, organizations have picked it up, which is that we now have plenty of evidence that in this country, the private carriers, the private railroads are incapable of giving us the service and the safety we need. And it's time for public ownership of the rail. The reason why we do that is because we know that there are places in the world, and Cuba is a shining example of that, where that public ownership makes sure, or it gives at least the tools that you need to make sure that all the stakeholders in the society are represented.
What else? So. Well, if she want, well, sorry, sorry, Judy, you can't answer. I was gonna move on to another question though, if that's okay. I mean, I just, but if you have an answer, please.
Just a quick thing.
Go. Yeah.
One of the things that amazed us when we met with the labor unions there, because we're these militant trade unionists, pretty much, like, how do you fight the boss? They said, we are the boss. But what about, what about this? What about that? What about, they said, well, and they were really good. They said, well, what we do is we try to ensure productivity. I said, what? They said, yeah, because we're really proud of what we do. We want to do the best job possible. This is about all of us. This is, if I produce something, it has to be high quality. We have a lot of health and safety. We do a lot of that. We have councils for this. We have councils for that. We have councils for this. But this is our product. We're proud of having good productivity here. And I said, we love our jobs. And of course, here everyone hates their job. I don't know. We all hate our jobs. Even if we love our profession, I love being a nurse, but I hate my job. I'm not to be a nurse. All I have to do is meet productivity standards that are actually causing harm to patients. And there it's a whole different headset. So I thought that was really interesting. Because we were saying, well, you don't really go on strike. What is that about? And I'm not going to get into all that because that's a whole other thing. But it made me realize that, when the product, when you're not seen as a commodity, as something that is like you're the thing you produce, that you're actually a human being that needs to be protected, that was a really big difference. And I think, the struggle here, as my comrades were saying, and our issues about safety and protection, where they blame us. No matter what happens, they blame us. And I'll give you an example of railroad. I don't know if you remember this big railroad. It was an Amtrak thing that happened on the Hudson, where we took care, and my ER, we took care of the victim. And they were already being painted as human error. This guy did it. And we were all like, oh my God, these people are done, they were horrible. And some of the nurses were saying, could they have done such a thing? I said, wait a minute, how they blame us? When something happens, I'll bet it's the same thing. Probably the guy fell asleep. I'll bet he was working too many hours. The thing there was probably a brake problem. And all those things I said, because I know how it is. And they said, we have to really think about that. Just like they would blame us, we can't blame these workers, because that's what happens. They cut back on safety. They cut back on training. They cut back on things you need for your life. Like we have mandatory overtime, working 24 hours. They do those things, you make mistakes, and then they blame you. System, that's the problem. They really don't care about the people who take care of. They don't care about the people who take care of them. They don't care about the workers. They just want to make money and squeeze us. So I think seeing that comparison was really important. And I'm sorry to be so.
No, thank you. Thank you for making space to say it. That's a beautiful lesson. So next question, Judy and Fritz, you might have sort of the best, because you've been in the movement for so long, be best capable of answering this, but so I know that historically the American labor movement has played an important role in the Cuba Solidarity movement. But it also seems to me that over the last few decades, in line with the decline of union membership, you've also seen a decline of like the labor movement as part of the Cuba Solidarity struggle, or at least as a priority within the labor movement. And so why do you think there's been this decline, and how do we help with that? So I'd be interested in hearing from the two of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have labor is currently on the defensive, and when the labor movement was most powerful in the 30s, they pushed for things that helped all people: Social Security, workers' compensation, food stamps, welfare, all the things that benefit everyone, not just their members. Once this sort of era of privilege developed among certain classes of workers, certain races of workers in the late 40s and the post-war period of the 50s, it was all about just me, just my members. And what was different in the welfare state in Europe and in the United States was within Europe, they created programs that benefited everybody. In the United States, that was the growth of this health insurance, horrible healthcare industry. I mean, speak about healthcare because that's my area. And instead of having a national plan that was good for everyone, ultimately they caved in for Medicaid and Medicare, which are totally insufficient, but better than nothing. Trade unions at the same time, just focused on getting members, getting dues, and not really focus on workplace democracy and member power, I'm sorry to say. And in fact, when you think about this concept of healthcare for all, that everyone, whether you're a worker or not, whether you have insurance or not, somebody in your family is being harmed by the fact that they don't have insurance. And trade unions, some of the trade unions are the biggest block to getting passage of a single payer bill because they're afraid they'll lose members. Why? Because they're not doing their jobs. And the members, and they feel like, well, at least I can sell my benefits to the members. It's a very selfish approach. And I'm not going to criticize anyone directly. I think it's an ideology that exists among trade unions. So supporting something external to what's going to get my members a good contract versus what's going to really benefit society at large is a big problem in our trade union here. In other countries, they have a left AFL-CIO and a right AFL-CIO. We only have the right AFL-CIO. So we have a lot of work.
I was just gonna, like my sister here, I was for many years an officer of my union, Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen, and I know firsthand the limitations of what you can do in that situation. It's one of our tools, we got to use it, but referred to the AFL-CIO. The AFL-CIO is the biggest labor body in the country. Fortunately, there are a few independent unions, but the AFL-CIO is hip attached to the Democrat Party, and they were never going to come out against the policies that the Democrats were interested in. So, and the Cuba question, on the Medicare question, on a bunch of other questions, including our one about public ownership in the rails, the independent labor movement, such as it exists, and it's very small, are the first ones that come forward and raise their hands to help in some way.
Yeah, we're gonna open up to audience Q&A and just very shortly. But want to say something, or do you?
I would, yeah. So I want to say that, currently I'm 32. Easy, buddy. Yes, so I want to say.
Excited.
Sorry, the dad came up. All right, so I want to say that I'm 32. All right, so I'm the youngest SEIU state council director in the country. Before that, I was the president of the South Dakota AFL-CIO State Federation. I was the youngest AFL-CIO president in the country. Before that, I was at 27. I was the president of the Sioux Falls South Dakota Central Labor Council, and I was the youngest Central Labor Council president in the country. I want to say that I think I can speak for me and my brother here, that and the trends that have been described by our elders in the trade union movement who came before us, the trends that they described are over. That shit is done. The young millennial and Gen Z trade unionists have no appetite for furthering capitalist exploitation and oppression around the world. We have no appetite for pandering to one party or another, or begging or crawling on our knees for basic human rights. The young trade unionists across this country have no appetite to continue those destructive trends that have been going on over the last few decades.
Fair question, but then we're gonna open it to the audience.
Yeah, so kind of building off of that, in recent years, I mean, as you discussed, there's been in rank and file democracy within you, and there's been a serious move to challenge the old bureaucracies and to fight for, yeah, just for member control. Now, given that, how might rank and file workers in these both big unions and new unions all over the country do support anti-imperialism, whether it's Cuba solidarity or other struggles? How can they work to push their unions, I suppose, to accept those messages more fully, get on board? If that makes sense as a question.
I would say, as as he stated earlier, with our generation, in the labor movement, it's about affecting change, but and as she stated earlier, it's not, we don't do this all for selfish needs. It's not, oh, what can benefit me, or having this will benefit me. I actually, about 1 year ago, I was supposed to leave to join the military. So I actually ended up nixing that plan because I felt so strongly about everything that I'm doing to help people. That was all I ever wanted to do as a kid, is help people. And I've now found this new way of helping people with this movement that I'm involved in. And, even the Amazon Labor Union, we support things that will benefit everybody. We are a prime supporter of the Secure Jobs Act, which was proposed by Councilmember Tiffany Caban, which would not only grant, not only protect unionized workers from unjust firing, but any worker in New York City. It would make one thing that most people get in their contract now a staple for every worker, which is the way it should be. No one should have to fight to try to keep their job, especially when you didn't do anything wrong. I think with our generation in the labor movement, it's more about correcting societal errors, where we feel society should be and the way that people should treat one another. And that's why I believe that, our generation is less likely to be corrupted in the same way, because we have very strong ideology and we stick to it very passionately. And I believe that at the end of the day, it is being in a union, or being the president of a union, or being any shop steward is a service, and it's something you should be proud to take part in. And there should be almost nothing in it for you other than the betterment of society.
Anyone else want to speak to the rank and file? Fritz?
I'll just say this, my organization, Railroad Workers United, is not a union. It is an alliance of union members and their supporters and railroad workers who aren't yet in unions all across North America. And it actually, we like to think of our heritage going back to Eugene Debs and various other movements in the labor movement. But it's also part of that trend of democratization, rank and file democratization movements that have been going on for years. And Teamsters Democratic Union, now auto workers have such an organization. I think it's something that's spreading all across. And I absolutely agree with the brother that part of the reason that this is spreading is because the younger workers are ready for a change in that regard. They're ready for a union movement that can defend them and extend, not just try and manage the rate of the givebacks, but to actively aspire to something else.
To raise consciousness internationally, you also have to raise consciousness locally. It's not like when people join an organization like a Cuba Solidarity Committee, it's by choice. People join unions because the union is what's in the workplace and they're there. And there's a lot of different ideologies among our members, from Trump supporters to God knows what, to people who are much more progressive. So I think what you have to do is, historically, you have to teach history. People have to understand that they walk on the shoulders of giants. They do not know because they don't learn about that. And what is the nature of the system? Most people don't like their jobs. They don't like their bosses, but they really don't know how to gain that power. And I think rank and file work, where you teach and empower and build stewards and build members and allow members, instead of fixing everything for them as a leader, you give people the tools to fix things for themselves. They get much more out of it. You have different tactics to win. And it was perfect with the strike. So we were really pressured not to go on strike by everybody. And when you become a leader in a union, the whole cucarachas come, like the politicians and the senators and the bosses, all try to buy you off, and you really have to make sure that people resist that. Because I've been involved in many caucuses over my 40 years in the nurses union, and we've had steps forward, steps back, steps back. But what happened when we were in this moment where we knew that we could fight this boss in a way that we never could before, because we never went on strike before. I was getting calls, oh, the governor's going to do something. You have, try to, what is it? Can you settle this? We're going to deadline. I said, look, we've been negotiating for 4 months. They haven't done shit for 4 months. And now we put our 10-day notice, and they're starting to get to do a 10-day notice. I said, we're not going to stop. And the nurses were like, we're going out. They were so angry because of COVID and all the things. And we said, we would betray them if we didn't go out. They were ready, and we didn't settle. And then the governor tried to put this injunction, not an injunction, binding arbitration, a stipulation. We did it, and I said, who cares? And then we went out, and we shut them down, their knees. And the nurses said, I have never felt like this in my life. And they were just so energized and so clear that labor creates whole wealth. They can't do anything without the workers. And we had power, and that power is something people are still feeling. Like when we had to go back, they said, but I was going to bring barbecue tomorrow. Why are we going back? They have to have a party, and it does for people to have the people, they have the money. When you get people out there and they understand that they treat you like badly at work, you can shut them down. When people know that, then they start thinking a little more broadly about what is this all about? Why am I so miserable? And why are the conditions so bad? And why did I have to go on strike? Because we went on strike to patient care. We went on strike because our patients were suffering. They were being treated like garbage. So the community was with us. It was just an incredible thing. And I think when you can develop that strength among the workers, that they feel that they own things, that they own their strike and they own their struggle, they start thinking way beyond that. And then you have an opening in which we can talk about what's going on in other countries and what the role is of the labor board, as you said, because the crapshoot when you win anything, or a kangaroo court. No. So people start, I've seen the broadness and how people are thinking now. There's an open mind to do much more right now. And you have to capture that moment once you have a big struggle.
We wanna open it up to audience questions. There's 1 or 2 on there, but I know. Just go, yeah.
Well, actually, what you said is what I was going to ask the panel about, because it's not just the nurses. I mean, I think there's been a tangible change in workers saying, enough is enough. I'm a bakery worker. There were strikes at Frito-Lay, Nabisco. I can't even remember how many strikes in the Bakery Workers Union last year. And, the signs, just look at the signs on the picket line, the young women saying, these are suicide shifts, no overtime, family time. Where I worked, they scheduled us to work 13, 12-hour shifts in a row, and that's the nature of this industry. So I think that bodes well for building solidarity with Cuba, because as you said, as you start to feel like you have some power, you also start to realize that it's class versus class. We don't live, there's not one America. It's not we, when Biden imposed the contract, that said a lot. So then you start looking, and Cuba is a real example of a country that's controlled by the workers and farmers. That's why, the unions control production, but it's because they control society, So anyway, I just wanted to hear what people, I mean, I'm optimistic. I think that's the main thing I wanted to say. And I also think that part of this whole discussion is that we need to strengthen our unions, and we need a labor party that is built on those unions. It can only come about as the unions become stronger, because it needs to be a party that fights for our interests, not for what the bosses want to give us. You know, it needs to be a real break from the Democrats and Republicans. And, you know, I was just wondering what the panelists thought about that.
I do think that, you know, at the end of the day, like politicians have changed over the last 50 years, 60 years, back when they used to support, you know, the people that got them elected, you know. I remember one time when I went to Netroots into Pittsburgh, I met Abigail Disney, whose grandfather helped co-found the Walt Disney Company, and he was very anti-union. She actually made that very clear. But she said that the reason is that he didn't feel like somebody needed to tell him to take care of his workers. It was a social contract. You took care of your workers. That's it. There should be nothing else but that. There's back in the days where a worker working 40 hours would full-time could support his family, buy a house, get a car. Nowadays, if you work 40 hours a week, you're probably going to be homeless. I know people at Amazon that have worked there for 40 hours and sleep in their cars. We need to go back to the time where politicians support the people that got them elected, not the people that give them money to be elected, you know? I feel like that's when it changes, when politicians started backing more of these billion-dollar companies and these billionaires who now make almost 600, 700, 800 times the amount of their median worker. And that should never be okay. Who needs that much money in their life? It really doesn't make any sense. So I believe that politicians should start enforcing policies that bring it back to supporting the regular working class people in America, and not these large companies lying to themselves thinking, oh, if we support them, they're going to create more jobs for us. And at the end of the day, all they're doing is shoving that money in their mattress and just keeping it hidden from the rest of us.
I think, so every generation wrestles with the question of independent working class political power. Every generation has. Now, when I was in elementary school, I remember that was a serious attempt led by our comrade Mazaki to form a labor party, and many unions, the postal workers and AFG and a lot of folks at a national convention and things like that, and ended up falling apart over, I believe, differences over whether to run candidates against Democrats and where and when and things like that. And before that, there was many political parties that were founded to be independent political parties of the working class, the Socialist Party being one, the Communist Party of the United States being one, so every generation wrestles with this question of what does independent political power look like, and what does a party of the working class look like. When I was president of the South Dakota AFL-CIO, we were in a place where 90% of all elected officials were Republican. In fact, as president of the State Labor Federation, there were more people in government that were appointed by me than there were elected Democrats, because the president of the State Labor Federation had constitutional rights to elect someone to this commission, to this state board, to this, all these different things. And so there was only about, a dozen Democrats in the whole state government, and we had about 15 labor appointed people that sat on various government positions. And so because of this, the State Labor Federation voted to create a commission to study the viability of an independent labor party within South Dakota, a South Dakota Labor Party led by the unions, withdrawing our support and financial contributions and things like that from our state Democratic Party, because we weren't getting shit out of it. Nobody was getting nothing out of it because nobody was getting elected. And so we studied how to remove our resources from a losing strategy and create a new one. And so I want folks to know, folks who have been part of that struggle in the 90s and other places, that this generation of millennials and Gen Z workers are no different than generations who came before, and that this is a question that we're wrestling with. And I believe that it's the responsibility It is the responsibility of my generation and the generation coming up after me to finally resolve the question. Now, I know that everyone has made great progress to wrestle with the question and fail to create an independent force, an independent political force for the working class. It's not a failure because there were a lot of good things that came from it, a lot of good ideas, and a lot of things did succeed, even though the overall project may have failed. And so I'm telling the folks in the room and the folks online who are part of that this is something recognized by Millennial and Gen Z workers, and it is something we're committed to finally resolving. And we owe it to the former generations to do so.
I would only just, I agree with all of that. It's just that the unions must also lead. And I don't just mean in terms of political parties and whatnot, but lead and not just decide that their industries get to make the decision and then we'll negotiate the benefits or the whatever like that, but lead. And so things like Medicare for all, single payer, or any of these other things.
So we actually, I know there's some questions in the crowd, but I just want to make sure we're not ignoring our online viewers. We have a question from online. Someone asked, and I guess they asked, what are the chances of building a US-Cuba labor exchange program? And I know that that's kind of a very specific question, so I'll offer to broaden it to, what do you think the advantages of exchange would be as well?
Already.
Well, it already exists. Yeah.
That's the question, so I'm not exactly.
Yeah, right. Well, so I mean, unions and union members have participated in delegations to Cuba for a long time. And they have different purposes. Some kinds it's very specific, other times it's more just general solidarity with Cuba. But I don't know what anybody else has to say about that.
I mean, all politics are local. I mean, you're talking about doing something broad, you have to start where you are. I think build something at some point, you know, maybe that is possible, but I think we really have to work with grassroots. Because you have to change people's minds, you have to change people's hearts, and we're subject to so much horrible propaganda. You know, everything good is demonized and everything bad is glorified. I mean, it's pretty scary, actually. So I think to build something like that, you really have to start in each area, in each region. And then I guess once you get enough buy-in, you know, maybe you can build something broader. But I do believe that these things happen step by step and at the grassroots.
I would say, you know, one thing that could help strengthen that is probably just, you know, like sharing of information, you know, as somebody that didn't know anything really about Cuba until I got involved in the labor movement. You know, I was always indoctrinated with the same things that I heard growing up, you know, that, you know, all the depictions of Cuban people in movies and TV shows. And so until getting involved in the labor movement, I never actually knew anything about like what's really going on. So what I would say is what would strengthen that is probably just more information, like sharing the stories of Cuban people to the regular, like younger generation. Because I guarantee you, we have not heard any of them until getting involved with Justine and getting involved in the Cuba group. I would have never heard anything about the struggle that the Cuban people go through the last 53 or 57 years or so. So I would say that's just, you know, more information out there, because at the end of the day, you know, people believe the stigma, and, you know, it's going to take a large, very public thing to kind of fight people's stigma because people don't know much. So I guess it would just be more about education, like educating people about what's really going on in Cuba and how it affects the people there through the younger generation that might not know anything about what's going on there. I think that would really help.
There's a question in the back.
No, I just wanted to bring up, I'm a city retiree, a New York City worker retired. And we're in a battle in New York in terms of fighting for original Medicare versus Medicare Advantage. And unfortunately, the unions that we're fighting are humongous, and, you know, they're the ones who are really, you know, losing power or not supporting. It's 250,000 retirees. Is it the elderly? And so, but in the struggle, I'm learning. And I'm thinking about what Judy was saying at the end about, you know, it's so local, but it's broadening, you know, like into, you know, that I have to talk to people about Medicare for all, or, you know, that we should all have universal care. And if you're elderly, more so, you know. So I'm not gonna continue because I can get too worried and get lost. But I just, you know, I appreciate, you know, unions. We all need to know that history. But the struggle is right there, you know. People feel like until, you know, something happens locally, like that the unions are no good, you know. But then you see like the nurses strike recently, and my own now experience, because I was in unions, but I never was involved, you know. But, you know, understanding what the rank and file, when you have a rank and file that is very savvy, or that is really has been involved in fights and now have broadened their solidarity work, that broaden, you know, and make connections of the issues, how they're connected. And the problem is the profiteering and, you know, privatization, not only of, you know, hospitals but schools and everywhere. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So we have about 15 more minutes. So if there are other people that want to ask, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask, now that we're seeing the United States ramp up this sort of Cold War with China, as that before they did with Russia, and they're still doing now. I want to know, there's a lot of criticism of China and its actions in the Caribbean. I disagree with those, but what is China's role in the international labor movement and specifically Cuba as well?
I've been to China, and I had to leave quickly. China's not Cuba. The trade union movement there is completely dominated by the Communist Party there. It is not a progressive movement. In fact, I was banned from WeChat because I did a program for the nurses that we were invited. And I had a couple of words like democracy and free speech, a couple of words in the program, and I was sent a notice within 14 hours. Will be banned forever from WeChat. I mean, there's a lot that's different there. I mean, you have to look at the whole historical context. And also when you think of China or Russia, you have to think in terms of the US being a military power. These are very broader. You have to look at everything in a lot of different ways in terms of the roles that Brexit plays versus the US. But in terms of Chinese workers, they are not feeling the love. There's very, very difficult conditions in China for workers. They don't have a lot of freedoms to fight. And it's a capitalist economy pretty much. It's not the greatest thing. But our responsibility here is tamping down what's going on in the United States, fighting for peace, fighting against war, weapons, and resources where resources belong. It's a very complicated question that you're asking. I don't think there's a simple answer. But I will tell you, a lot of people, when I went to China, they were workers, and they felt comfortable speaking. They were not pleased with the way things were going at all. There's an upper class, there's a bourgeois class there right now. That's not how it is in Cuba.
I think that, I think criticism is important, and it's important where the criticism comes from, and it's important the context. Right. So for an example, an American going to China and saying the word democracy is different than a Chinese person saying the word democracy. There's a different political context that comes within that culture and within that system. I think it is our duty as good working class trade unions, people committed to our class, to trust the leadership of people in the Caribbean. So if the question is, what is China's role in the Caribbean, a positive role in the Caribbean, the best thing we can do is ask the BTC what they think. Ask the Cuban Communist Party, ask the government of Cuba, is this a positive relationship? And if they say yes, it is our duty to trust that. It goes back to what I said at the beginning here, that believing that the enemies of the capitalists, the enemies of our government, are not necessarily our enemies as working class people. And so we have to understand, the ins and outs, and it's very complicated geopolitics, right? And so even me, if I went to Cuba and I said, let's have a big democracy rally, that holds an entirely different context than if I do it here or do it anywhere else. And it does suddenly become threatening and dangerous and things like that because of America's aggression everywhere else. But I think working class Americans don't necessarily have to have a position on every relationship that everyone has everywhere in the world. It's not, we can barely manage our own damn relationships. We don't need to be butting our nose in other people's relationships. And so I think the best thing we can do is trust our comrades around the world when they're around the world and expect them to trust us. And that's what international solidarity is at its most basic foundation.
I can say that when I was in Cuba, there was a robust conversation by Cubans about their relations with China. And there are a lot of advantages that they have from those relations, and that's their business. I agree with the brother 100%. 2 times ago, our own convention, the Railroad Workers United, we had a lot of international guests, and one was a contingent of 3 Chinese railroad workers. And we had a lot of interesting conversations with them, and they interviewed us and got information back. And I can tell you this, there is a living independent trade union movement in China, and they do conduct strikes, and they do participate. So there's the government structure, and that's a whole other conversation. But this is a real thing that goes on, and the Chinese people get to make those decisions.
I also want to point out, I know I'm just the moderator, but there is also an international that workers in both Cuba and China, a trade international, are a part of the World Federation of Trade Unions. And a lot of the unions in the global south are in this international federation, and they come together and they try to figure out how to work through their international struggles and their own, have talks between their own bilateral struggles, right? And I think my personal opinion is we should all be trying to push our own unions to join the World Federation of Trade Unions, because that's how we as unionists can really come together to work through these contradictions. So that brother there, and then you, sir.
Well, I think to really address what you raised is to just look at other countries the way you would look at the US. You would never say all Americans are the same. I think in this crowd, we understand it's a very class divided society. And that's very true about China, and it's very true about Russia. Russian working people have a growing protest movement against Putin's war. You can't understand what's going on in a country unless you start dissecting by the different classes. And I thought, Cooper, your comments were interesting because it helps get to something that it's not so much that generations are different or live in different times, but times are changing, and it's that the system's getting more desperate. I can't speak as a worker who can pretend to be young anymore. But it means that I've seen in just my lifetime some changes that are significant. A teenage daughter of mine is going out into a work world that's way different than when I was 19. And it's because capitalism is out to get us in a way much harsher than it was 40 years ago. It ain't gonna let up. So it's great that the labor movement is on a rise and that we see this combativeness. It couldn't have happened 40 years ago, partly because our leaders were trapped in the clutches of the Democratic Party, but workers didn't think it was necessary to fight 40 years ago. You were hoping for some lesser solution to the mess that you were starting to feel. 40 years later, you got 40 years of this. And, it's not going to get better. So this is the world we live in. And the threats of war with China is part of that. And it's going to have its repercussions in our social conditions.
So what is Cuba's role in the WFTU? What is the WFTU and what is the difference between it and the ITUC?
Actually, Cooper, could you speak to this a little bit? Because you might.
Yeah, I can break that down. Okay, so every labor, damn near every labor federation, national labor federation in the world has, is part of either the International Trade Union Confederation or the World Federation of Trade Unions. The AFL-CIO is part of the International Trade Union Confederation, though there's several local unions in the United States that are members of the World Federation of Trade Unions, and the World Federation of Trade Unions does welcome American unions. The AFSCME local at the University of Minnesota is part of the World Federation of Trade Unions. The Painters local in Los Angeles is part of the World Federation of Trade Unions, and there's other worker organizations and alliances similar to Railroad Workers United, but that exist in the United States that are part of the World Federation of Trade Unions. This comes down to old Cold War politic bullshit. The World Federation of Trade Unions was the first worldwide international labor federation. Every organization, including the CIO in the world, was part of the World Federation of Trade Unions. And then when the Cold War started ramping up and imperialist aggression to attack the worldwide revolution led by the Soviet Union, the Cuban people all over Africa and places like that was kicking off, the capitalists decided they needed to separate and they could use the labor movement to crush revolutions all over the world. And so they started what they called free trade unions, the International Free Trade Union Confederation and things like this. But really they were pawns of the CIA. That's why the AFL-CIO back in my elders' day was called the AFL-CIA because they funded these fake trade union movements all over the world that were used to undermine real revolutions and real worker power in other countries all around the world. And so what you have now is the International Trade Union Confederation, which mostly is labor federations in Europe, including the United States and some other places. They represent about 180 million people and 180 million workers around the world. And then you have the World Federation of Trade Unions, which also represents about 180 million people around the world. These two organizations are split really by more by ideology than geography, because there are national federations that are part of both. The South Africans, the COSATU, the South African Trade Union Confederation, is part of both WOF2 and the ITUC and things like that. But so these two exist and are different, but both the labor unions in the United States are free to join the World Federation of Trade Unions. And the key difference is one is a militant fight back worker power, worker control federation in the WOF2, and the ITUC is more worker power. See, these are not bad people in the ITUC. They believe in more worker power under bourgeois control, more worker rights under bourgeois control, more comfortable worker existence under capitalist control. And WOF2 is overthrow the capitalist class worldwide.
So I just got the signal that we are wrapping up, so I wanted to, our panelists, the opportunity to make any last thoughts. And thank you all for coming, and then we'll go straight on down.
I just want to say thank you guys for having me here, and thank you for everything that you do to help the Cuban people. I am hopefully going to Cuba with the LA group in May, so I can finally meet some of the people myself and see what it's like to really affect their lives. And I would hope that any more of my comrades would come and join me in the future and to bring more awareness to this cause. Thank you all so much for having me.
Again, I want to say thank you for all the workers who put this conference together and put everything together. I want to lift up the current struggle of OPEIU Local 153 that is currently organizing at the Rose Hill campus of Fordham University that is that has just filed a ULP against Fordham University for bullshit union busting tactics. And so we all here stand in solidarity with OPEIU Local 153. And I want to say that, as I've said multiple times here, that in the words of Nelson Mandela, Your enemies are not necessarily our enemies. The enemies of the government, the enemies of the capitalist class, the enemies of the bosses are not necessarily the enemies of the working class. Fidel Castro did more for the US working class than any president in the history of the United States. And working class people have to have their own independent mindset. And when we develop that, we can build our own relationships and we can finally bring the era of decade after decade after decade of capitalist, imperialist exploitation and aggression. We can dismantle it and build a real political and economic system worldwide based on the principles that the working class holds dear. And those are the principles of solidarity and justice.
For their contributions on this. This is an important question. I'll just real quickly leave you with this last thing. Support this idea about the class one railroads across this country. We need public ownership. We need public ownership.
I think what's really important is that we like talking to each other, but we need to talk to other people. Other people are fed so many lies and they lose hope. People who want change, people who want to feel good about their jobs, people who want to feel good about their country, people want to feel good about what's going on, people want to feel they have a sense of future. And right now, I just have so much faith in the younger generation. Whatever names I can. I think that these are thinking people that are now asking a lot of questions. It used to happen maybe 40 or 50 years ago. We skipped a couple of years. I'm seeing that again, and that's really exciting. But we do have to talk to people and we do have to share with people who don't know these things. It's not that easy, but I think that if we do it, and we also, if we're in trade unions or if we're doing labor work, let's do things that confront the boss. Let's do things that challenge capital. Because this business about feeling like you have to be on the defensive and that you have to be happy that you have a job, that's going to kill us all. You know, people have to really make it very clear that we are the people, we are the workers that create the wealth, not the bosses. And confronting that is what makes people so much open to so many other ideas. I've seen it happen time and again. And I'm very excited that we're seeing a lot more strikes and a lot more job actions, and we have to support those job actions. I have to tell you, when we were on strike, and these are people that never thought about anything but being a nurse. All these other unions came, donuts and coffee and support and honking their horn. When we made a speech, and as soon as somebody honked their horn, we had to stop talking because they get, yeah, you know, like people knowing that other people care about them. That's what happens when you have a labor struggle, and we have to have more of them to help our workers and our colleagues fight back, challenge this monster that's controlling all of us. So let's keep up the fight.
Let's keep it going. So the panels that we're supposed to start at 4, you're gonna be starting in 15 minutes at 4:30. Just so you guys